So, from your perspective, what are the main pain points that companies are experiencing that they come to you when it's too late?
Usually it's something that's gone wrong. Let me step back and say I always encourage people to reach out early. It's typically easier to address questions or issues before they happen, but people will call and be like, "Hey," and this happens all the time. "We signed this distribution agreement. Well, you're just getting started. We didn't feel like we had a lot of leverage, so we just signed it. We didn't honestly really read it. No lawyer reviewed it, or maybe my cousin or uncle who's a whatever real estate lawyer or something read it and it was like, okay, fine." The same thing happens with co-pack agreements, contract bottling agreements. And then there's a dispute now.
Welcome to Thursday Thursdays at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. My name is Jessie Ott, the host of this podcast, which is all about beverage innovation. I talk with innovation pioneers from agriculture to glass. Thank you for listening, and be sure to subscribe to be notified of all new episodes. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Thursday Thursdays. I am Jessie Ott, and I have Ryan Malkin, principal attorney of Malkin Law and founder of Set the Bar. Hey, Ryan, welcome.
Thank you. How's it going? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm super pumped to have you here. You've come up on podcast here and there, and I know you've been on Erica's show a couple of times and had some awesome discussions and talked about a lot of different things in regards to, obviously a lot of new beverage companies have launched the last few years, and I'm sure it's kept you very busy. And one of the things that I talked to Ryan about before we got him on the show here is to kind of give the audience a guide on different beverages instead of just talking through it. Maybe do it in a little bit more structured way. So hopefully, people will remember, one, and two, that we'll have a downloadable document depending on whatever option they're looking at building, whether that's non-alc or RTD or alcohol or THC or CBD, because they all have their own laws, right? And even with NA Bevs, I understand, like just talking to the guys over at Athletic Brewing, that there are still some stickiness with shipping online and that type of thing. So, Ryan, where are you calling from?
I'm in my office in Miami, Florida. So happy to be here.
So, is that where you're from? Are you from Miami area?
No, I grew up actually in Michigan. And then after undergrad, I moved to New York to be a writer, actually. So I was a journalist and I was a staff writer at Smart Money magazine, which now closed, but it was a Wall Street Journal publication. And I did a lot of the lifestyle stuff. So I wrote about alcohol and trends and like what's the best whiskey to buy your father for Father's Day. And then I did a lot of freelance writing for magazines and did roundups and trend pieces. So like for Beverage Media or Sante or Liquor.com, Esquire and what have you.
That's really cool. Did you meet Erica back then?
I did a little bit. Well, not then, but I did work with her a little bit more. Wasn't when I was a lawyer, but I did a lot of alcohol beverage writing, and that's kind of how I really got into the industry more on the business side. And that's actually sort of how I connected with my wife, actually, who has a public relations agency in the alcohol beverage industry called Culturewise Collective. So funny enough, I sort of was emailing her as a journalist prior to being a lawyer. So anyway, I was
Interesting.
in New York for about 15, 16 years. I was a writer, like I said. And then after maybe 4 or 5 years of being a writer, I went to law school at night and
Where did you go?
I went to Brooklyn Law School at night.
Nice. One more question. Being from Michigan, which school did you go to?
I went to University of Michigan, go blue.
Okay, I'm a Hawkeye, so not that it matters anymore because the Big Ten is such a mess. But yeah, we used to be really big rivals back in the cool days of the Big Ten.
Yeah, yeah. Um,
Yeah,
so yeah, so
nice.
I was a writer in New York, and then I went to law school at night, kept writing during the day. And then after law school, I ended up going to the New York County DA's office, so the Manhattan DA's office.
That's awesome.
And I took a complete sort of turn, right, instead of continuing in the publishing world. However, I
Yeah.
kept doing a little bit of freelance work during that time, continuing to keep my foot in the door, toe in the water, whatever you want to say, in the alcohol world, doing some freelance writing. Again, still trend pieces, things like that. Uh, and
So
then
what was it like to work in the DA?
It was awesome. I loved working there. They give you a lot of responsibility, and, you can certainly, control whether or not someone goes to jail basically or does community service. And,
Yeah.
it's great because you can certainly make sure that people are prosecuted if they need to be, or you can be more lenient if you don't think they need to be. So, I mean, it's definitely a lot of control, which is great. And you can use your discretion, but it was awesome being on trial. And I mean, it's a very fun job, and to use like a Pernod Ricard term, convivial. Like, it was a very convivial environment where everybody hung out a lot and, went out after work. And so it was definitely an awesome place to work.
That's great.
And then after about 5 or so years there, that's when I went out in-house to Pernod Ricard, because I wanted to get into the legal side of alcohol, because I really just love the industry from the business side. And I had a lot of friends in the industry because of being on the PR side and going on press trips and all that. And that's kind of when I started on the road of being an alcohol beverage attorney. And then after several years there, my wife and I moved to Miami because she grew up here. So that's when I started my practice, Malkin Law, about 11 years ago now. So
Wow, 11 years. That's good. That's great. Congratulations.
long version of getting to why I'm in Miami now.
Yeah, well, that's really cool. Did you have any mentors that you'd want to mention that kind of helped you, whether it was in transition or at the DA or
I mean, I
you know?
really loved all of my supervisors, which was great. Paul Finch was the editor at Smart Money, who gave me my first basically job in journalism, and he was great. And then at the DA's office, Gene Percaro was my supervisor, and he was awesome and explained everything. And he was a great supervisor and mentor for a lot of people. And then when I went to Pernod, Tom Lala and Carolyn McNerney were my supervisors. And the reason I got the job, partially, which is kind of a good maybe thought for anybody trying to get a position, I looked up his bio on, I don't know, it was LinkedIn or wherever it was, maybe on the website, and he was a former prosecutor. So I actually just reached out to him kind of randomly and was like, "Hey, I'm currently a prosecutor. I'm thinking of leaving. I love the alcohol beverage industry. I used to write about it, so I know the business side. Candidly, I don't really know any of the legal side. Can we just get together, and can you explain to me how you transitioned from the DA's office to this world?" And we got together, and it just so happened that he had something that he thought I'd be suitable for. So just as a way of example, if you're looking at a position you really want or transitioning, looking at
Yeah,
people and kind of their background and finding a common kind of link is maybe a good idea. And I know that prosecutors, certainly in Manhattan, but anywhere really, kind of have that thing where you can be like, "I was a prosecutor too," and they know what you've been through, and usually are helpful and happy to get together, even though we work.
that's great. Yeah, that's some great advice right there. That's really cool. What a great idea.
And then I transitioned in the current GC. Brian Shevlin is great, and we transitioned, or we were kind of overlapping for like maybe a year or so.
Okay. Any resources that you recommend?
I mean, well, for what? Just generally for.
Well, for industry knowledge and or potentially law
Yeah,
information.
yeah. So, I mean, I started Set the Bar, which is an app, a few years ago. And the idea came to me because clients were asking me to create like state cheat sheets, right? So, New York, Florida, whatever, where they had salespeople. And it would be basically a Word document with maybe the top 10 or 12 things that they need to know in that state. So, for instance, can you do an on premise tasting, off premise tasting? What's the maximum you can give in displays, what have you? And I was doing those and finding that, salespeople largely don't want to carry around a Word document. Mhm. You're right. Whether it's physical or on their phone, they just
Yeah,
don't use it. So I created this app to have similar information and make it in an really easy to use form. Like, is it okay? Green? Is it not okay? Red? Is there caution? It's like a maybe yellow, right? And then you can click more, and then that has a little bit more of the rules and the details behind it and kind of an easy to read format. So that's one resource. Obviously, we direct clients.
yeah, that's a great one.
A lot of them use it, and people who are not our clients also use it. Um, and then beyond that, signing up for the bulletins, like the TTB has a great newsletter. And if you sign up on the TTB website, they'll shoot you an email when there's changes. And a lot of the states have the same thing. So if you're in a state, I would encourage you to sign up for the ABC SLA or equivalent, newsletters and TTV too.
Okay, awesome. So, from your perspective, what are the main pain points that companies are experiencing that they come to you when it's too late?
Usually it's something that's gone wrong. Let me step back and say I always encourage people to reach out early. It's typically easier to address questions or issues before they happen. But people will call and be like, "Hey," and this happens all the time. "We signed this distribution agreement. Well, we were just getting started. We didn't feel like we had a lot of leverage, so we just signed it. We didn't honestly really read it. No lawyer reviewed it, or maybe my cousin or uncle who's a whatever real estate lawyer or something read it and it was like, okay, fine." The same thing happens with co-pack agreements, contract bottling agreements. And then there's a dispute now. Sometimes it's good, right? Like, hey, we have a national alignment with a big distributor. How do we get out? Or these guys are terrible and we can't get out. So those are the issues that often come up on the distribution side. And then on the co-pack side, it's typically that there was something wrong, right? Like all of my cans are exploding, or there's something gross in the product and there's glass, whatever it is. And we're the client. We didn't actually touch anything. We didn't co-pack it. We didn't make anything. We're just a brand company. The co-packer saying, no, it's not our responsibility. The glass or the can company and all the parties are pointing their fingers, being like it's somebody else. Meanwhile, you don't have a product in the market and you're the one that is kind of holding the bag. So resolving those things as clearly as possible in contracts is obviously better, right? All of these things are sort of like prenups and looking at the worst case scenario now.
Okay. And then what about the outlook for the industry? There's been a lot of rumble and tumble, and Wegovy is taking away everybody's interest in drinking, but no, it's fine. It's kind of this yo-yo effect of, is it healthy or is it not? Do you have any do you have any
I mean, people say that and obviously there are clients where they're saying that they're having a difficult time finding additional fundraising, which is certainly something that's happening and I'm aware of that. I certainly still have a positive outlook. Like we still have clients who are starting brands. I think that long term, I don't foresee people necessarily stopping drinking despite the current trend. Maybe people will drink a little bit less, but when I've been going out, people are still going to the bars. They're still lining up to get beer concerts, right? Like, so I'm still very optimistic, even if there's more options in terms of the non-alcohol world, which is great, right? Like I've been trying some non-alcoholic spirits that are actually like really, really good. And that's
which
great.
ones?
What's that?
Which brands have you tried
Well,
that you like?
there's a couple that are launching that I think are really, really great. And I will certainly let you know when the time is right.
Okay.
They're
Okay.
much better than I think others.
Okay.
Same with beer, right? Like I've been trying a lot of non-alcoholic beers and those are great options too. So just because you don't drink every single day, which, probably is not the best thing, alternating. And so I'm super optimistic for both the non-alc world and alcohol.
Yeah, me too. I mean, we've only been doing this for 8,000 years. Wine's been around 8,000 years. I don't think there's going to be that big of a bump in the road. Anyway, that's good. Good positive outlook is always a good thing. Yeah, I mean, that's the one thing about the industry is it's recession proof. People may trade down, but they're not going to stop. And, what we're seeing now is they're trading, right? So, well, I can't drink or I don't want to drink, but I can get THC and CBD and, and or they take gummies or whatever the case may be. I feel like they may just be trading on and off, for something else.
Yeah. I mean, I personally think that COVID was a high point, right? In terms of the amount people were drinking. Perhaps now it's just, and again, I'm not looking at the stats. So this is more like
Right.
anecdotal
Yeah.
than statistical, but I think people just are kind of getting back to a baseline versus like that high of like drinking pretty regularly during COVID.
Yeah. Yeah. You mean when it went like this?
Yeah, yeah.
Where everybody bought Bailey's because they had it in their coffee every morning for a year and a half. That was pretty funny. That is pretty funny. So that's wow, we got through that really fast. But Ryan, so congratulations on your career. That's really exciting to have your own business for 11 years and I can't wait to dig into
Yes.
our next phase of the interview here, and that's kind of us talking about the different non-alc, alcohol, CBD, and THC, the rules and laws, because they do vary by type. And then what we'll do is start off by just talking about the basics of starting a brand, whatever it is, right? Because there's going to be some overlap on how you kind of approach that piece. So when maybe we come up with a name of a person to use as an example of a brand that they want to create. So do you have a name that pops into your brain at all?
I mean, we can, Jesse's whiskey or
It's Jesse's whiskey. Okay. Jesse's whiskey. I'm making a whiskey. Okay, let's start there. What do I do?
yeah. It's actually a little bit assembly line-ish. And what I mean by that is you form a company and, you can talk to an accountant, but a lot of people will form an entity in Delaware, especially if they're taking on investors. If they're not, maybe they'll just form in whatever state they are, get an EIN number so they can open a bank account. And then
Why would Delaware be more of an investor state?
investors like strategics and VCs, private equity, et cetera, tend to prefer Delaware just because the laws are favorable and there's a lot of precedent regarding corporations there. So a lot of corporations, like a lot of the publicly traded companies, are Delaware companies. And then you'll do a foreign filing, meaning that although you're a Delaware company, you're filing to do business in the state of Florida, let's say, right? So, but in your case, if you're a small company and it's just you and maybe a couple of friends that you raise money from, and you're in Florida, maybe you just file a Florida LLC, let's say. And the question now is, are you going to become a distillery and distill it yourself, or more likely than not, you're going to co-pack? So if you're going to co-pack, then you're going to obviously need a contract with the co-packer, and you have to figure out your route to market. During this time, you would also be filing for your trademark, right? So it takes a long time for the USPTO to look at your application, like 9 to 12 months in some cases,
Oh my gosh.
which is not to say,
Seriously?
yeah, but that doesn't mean you can't use the name.
Wow.
It just means that you should pick a great name, ideally. Like we'll run a clearance search and see, is it completely clear there's nobody because you made up the name, right? Like a Google or a Yahoo or whatever, like that they brought to the name, or are you something that's actually not a very good name for a whiskey, Jesse's whiskey, so probably not a good name actually. For trademark purposes, especially if it's named after you. But in any event, you would file the trademark.
What about Thursday's whiskey?
Right. Much better, probably. So then you would file that. You'd enter into the contract, like I said, with the co-packer. You got to figure out your route to market, right?
Well, can we back up a second? Like, what's a co-packer and why do I need one of those?
So if you're not going to distill it yourself, then somebody has to make it for you with a distilling license or bottling, right? So maybe you buy it or going to get it from Kentucky or Tennessee or somewhere, and then you would transfer it to the bottling facility in Florida if you're going to bottle in Florida, let's say. So somebody's with appropriate licenses has to ultimately either distill it or bottle it for you.
Yeah. Okay.
You can get your own license, but obviously there's a lot of startup costs to rent a location, get stills, like fermentation tanks. I mean, that's a whole thing. You can
Yeah.
also do what they call an alternating proprietorship, where in some states and certainly federally, that you are a tenant at another person's distillery, but you would get all the same licenses. But most people start by co-packing. If
Yeah,
they,
I mean, that's how TX started. You know, when I think back to that whiskey trend, I feel like TX was one of the early ones to get the MGP juice, right? Bottle it in their own bottle, maybe age it whatever they wanted to. And then that's how they built their business. That's then once they had that going, it offered them more cash to buy more barrels to start doing their own, right?
yeah, that's a common way to do it for sure, especially if you want kind of the tourist destination and the tasting room and stuff like that. But no, you're completely right. Most brands will start with like MGP juice or something like that, and then maybe do something unique to it, maybe not. Put it in their own bottle with their own label and hope for the best. The whiskey market is obviously tougher than it was in the past, but by way of example, it would be similar. So you would find the right person to bottle it in any case, whether it's distilling and bottling, maybe for a gin or a vodka, receiving older juice from somewhere else, probably for a whiskey. And you would make sure that the contract is reviewed, hopefully by competent attorney that works in this space. And so what I mean by the distribution plan, though, is it's harder and harder for smaller brands to find distributors, especially the Southern RNDC breakthrough tier. A lot of people will start with smaller distributors, which could be like a Park Street or an MHW or Meridio or Ellen Tenney or something like that, where they kind of offer back-end compliance solutions and will warehouse the product and then ultimately deliver it, but don't have salespeople, right? So I'm sure everybody knows or should know if they're getting into this industry that most distributors at the smaller level, for smaller brands, meaning, are not really doing that much. It's largely more of a delivery truck. So you should be willing and able to run around town and try to get your product into accounts, right? So um, I wouldn't rely on a distributor to do that work for you. So assuming you start with one of these like kind of compliance distributors that are doing the work but not having the salesperson, that's great. Then you can decide based on your state what firm permits you'll need. Certainly it'd be a federal permit at the very minimum, a federal basic wholesale permit, and then likely some state permit. And then you're kind of off and running. And then you focus on things like, your website. Are you going to have some sort of modified DTC option? Are you going to, have social media presence? Like, what are the marketing activities you're going to do? So, and that's where we help out and we'll look at your website, draft terms and conditions and privacy policies, look at your social media. If you have like a really cool activation, we'll, look at it, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I feel like there's been some changes recently with direct to consumer shipping, if I'm not mistaken, in New York or Pennsylvania. Is that
So,
right?
yeah. So obviously wine, it's quite easy and pretty widespread. For spirits, it's pretty minimal. However, there are some states in New York passed DTC. It's allowed intrastate and allowed interstate where there's reciprocity, but with other states, but there's a lawsuit. You're right. I think that's what you're maybe referring to, where they're basically challenging the reciprocity requirement. But if you're in New York and you're a distiller in New York and your customers in New York, you're good to go and can send it to that person DTC like a winery could, which is awesome.
Yeah, yeah, which is super awesome. Yeah. How many states is there states that aren't allowing you to ship spirits
Well, like
currently?
as an example, like distilleries in Florida can't sell to Florida consumers DTC. And there's a lot of states. I mean, I would say more states than not don't allow distilleries to ship DTC to even in the state, let alone interstate.
Okay. So
So
that's still kind of on lockdown.
yeah, I'm counsel for American Craft Spirits Association, and we've been pushing for, DTC on the spirit side for years. I mean, it just makes sense. It doesn't, in my opinion, really take away significant revenue from distributors. It actually helps, right? So, like, if I'm in Florida and I'm allowed to ship DTC, if I'm sending a couple of cases to California or New York or Michigan or something, is that really going to, and I don't even have distribution in there. Is that really going to take away from a distributor's margins?
Right.
And then
Right.
maybe it's like I'm getting so many orders in California that I'm like, maybe I should find a distributor, and the distributor,
Well, that's just it. That's how it could happen.
right,
Yeah.
right. I mean, that's great. And then you go find a distributor. Now all of a sudden you're like, hey, distributor, like we have a ton of interest here. Now somebody could go to a liquor store and buy a product too, and the on premise. Um, I'm all for it.
Yeah. Well, what about websites like Flaviar?
So whether it's them or there's a bunch of other alternatives, obviously out there, where basically I think what you're talking about. Well, let me ask you, are you talking about where you go to like a storefront, an Amazon style storefront, or where it's modified DTC where you're going to the brand website but getting it delivered?
Yeah. Brand website getting it delivered.
So basically what happens is on those, there's a third party provider, and on the back end, you add it to the cart, and that third party provider is choosing liquor stores based on their relationships in, different states. So they'll send that order to a liquor store in, let's say New York, and that liquor store in New York will actually just deliver the product. There are cases where some liquor stores and some websites will rely on what they call the title theory. So the idea is I'm in Florida, title's taking place in Florida at this liquor store, but then that Florida retailer is choosing to deliver the product to California or New York. That's a little bit different. So some allow that service and take those, take those arguments on, and others will just do what they call intrastate shipping. So they'll only deliver where they have retailers in the same state as the consumer. But it's basically like a modified feeling of DTC, but it's not DTC.
So if I had a distillery in Florida and I wanted to ship you some bottles, I could put the product on Flaviar or GoPuff or wherever it is and have it shipped to a local store near you to deliver it?
No. So, well, GoPuff is a retailer in a lot of states. So let's use, and I don't want to single out Flaviar, and I don't necessarily.
Right. I'm just, that's all, that's one
But
I know.
yeah. So, whatever third party provider, basically what happens is the distillery or the brand still has to go through a wholesaler to sell to that Florida retailer. Right.
Okay.
So I go to the thirstythursdays.whiskey.com. I click buy now. Now that takes me to a app or website that's managed by Thirsty Thursdays. The order then gets processed and the payment goes to a retailer in Florida who a wholesaler sold to. And now that Florida retailer is selling to me and delivering to my office in Florida through the three-tier system. So it's really not a DTC sale. From the consumer perspective, they'd be like, "Oh yeah, maybe I'm buying from the brand," but they're buying from a liquor
They're
store
not.
up the street. It's sort of like what Drizzly used to do
Yeah.
when it was around. Drizzly was obviously a little bit different, where you were seeing the inventory at different liquor stores. It's sort of like that, but the face of it is the brand face. That's kind of maybe a way to think about it.
Is there limitations to it then? So if I want a bottle delivered to me in, Lake Mary, but it's not in Central Florida, it's only in Miami.
Well, it could be
Is
limited in a few ways. It could be limited in where the product's distributed, right? So if you're only distributed in Florida, then it's a challenge to be able to send that product to all 50 states, obviously, because whether they use a title fee or not, there's some states where you simply are not supposed to ship to, right? So you're definitely limited by where the product is distributed.
could that be a pass-through distributor
It could be any
example?
distributor that sells to that state, sure. So it doesn't have to be a formal, big guy, but it would have to be a distributor license in that state, obviously, to sell. So that's why DTC is obviously better, not only from a margin perspective, because as the brand, you're like, yeah, I'm satisfying more sales because I'm doing it through the online platform, through this three-tier system, but they're not getting any more margin. If they're doing DCC, the consumer's still getting the same bottle for $40, but instead of selling it to the distributor for whatever, 20, and then the retailer taking its margin and all that, I'm selling it for 40 and I keep the margin. So DTC definitely helps the distilleries. And with distilleries not doing as well as they were previously, I think it's more important than ever to give them this margin and give them access, to market access.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's a big difference.
Yeah, it's huge.
Yeah. But, the law's a law.
No, for sure.
You got to follow it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's why we're here.
That's why we're here. So what else do we need to do? What's next in the line? Did we kind of cover the bev alcohol, the whiskey?
On the distilled spirit side, that's kind of it. And then you're just going to get more and more advanced in terms of, marketing activations and what you can and cannot give and to retail accounts and all that kind of stuff. The regulations are very different state to state, are the most restrictive for beverage alcohol. And so we spend obviously a lot of our time answering questions like, we want to have an event and do this. We want to have a sponsorship. We want to, we give glassware in this state versus that state. All those things are regulated. So those questions will come up. And then certainly there may be questions around like fundraising or bringing on another partner, stuff like that. And we can address all that.
Well, we got in trouble with the law. I was working at Kexi, which is a tech platform, but we were at Techstars in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and we were at the last day of the like 3-month program or 6-month program, and everybody that has a brand does their pitch. And so they have tons of investors and different people coming in listening to the pitches. And so we wanted a cool table, so I got 50 mLs and put them all out with some pins and all the things. Come to find out, there were cops there and they made us put it away.
Yeah, yeah,
Oopsie.
yeah. Things like that. You'd think it's like,
Yep.
oh, here it's a 50 ml, but how'd you get it into the state and all that kind of stuff. So it's definitely a challenge to make sure you're doing everything right.
Yeah.
That's why we're
Do
here.
you want to switch over to the non-alcoholic beverage? Say, I feel like from that perspective, and maybe I'm wrong, you got to be careful of your ingredients, where you're sourcing from, careful what verbiage you put on the can, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's definitely much easier, but very similar. Obviously, the good part of the TTB side with formulas and labels is that TTB approves those things. So you sort of know I did it right or it's approved, and if it was approved by TTB and error, at least I feel comfortable like, yeah, it's approved by somebody, right? On the non-alc side, FDA does not pre-approve. So you just need to make sure you get it right. And if there was an issue or is an issue, then you're going to find out through enforcement, which is very minimal, or a consumer lawsuit, which is not great. Which is not to say
Yeah,
there can't
that's
be
not great.
lawsuits in the beverage world. There are, I mean, in the alcohol beverage world, there are, but you just need to be careful because there's no pre-approval process. But it's the same thing in terms of starting the company, doing the trademarks, obviously a different class, a trademark, and the co-pack agreement. You're more likely than not with non-alc to not start your own facility and co-pack somewhere. And then you're right. You want to have your label reviewed by somebody that knows what's going on in terms of the ingredients going into it, and then the label itself. You still have those same co-pack agreement issues where you want to make sure that, and it's almost in some ways more, not more important, equally important, but like definitely something to think about, because with alcohol, the alcohol typically is more stable for a longer period because of the alcohol. With non-alc, there's not the same shelf life oftentimes, and there's oftentimes more issues with the product kind of going bad or getting gross. So you do want to make sure that you have your agreements reviewed. And then otherwise it's quite similar. The distributor would be more likely than not like channel related. So if you have a non-alc beer, maybe you go with a beer distributor. If you have a non-alc spirit, maybe you go with spirits distributors. The thing is, they send you largely the same contract. So it's almost like the same thing, even though you're normally not going to be locked into franchise laws or locked into a distributor contract like you might be in the alcohol world. You kind of are by virtue of the contracts that they send you. So you just need to be careful.
Yeah. Yeah, and when I think of ingredients, I had Fresh Victor on earlier this year, and he made a comment about how his contracts are long term with his citrus providers and this, that, and the other. In other words, he's protected it kind of against these any kind of rise in prices and whatnot. And I felt like, wow, that's really good advice, because you never know when that could happen, right?
Yeah, I mean, certainly if you can get a supply agreement or something with important suppliers, that's great, especially if you can lock in pricing. I've been for many years, even before the current tariff situation, putting in a provision like, because sometimes distribution contracts will say you won't increase price for the first year or the first 3 years, but I'll put things like, other than if our cost of goods or tariffs or things like that increases significantly, which you kind of define. I was doing it actually more because of agave shortages and agave pricing, where if we needed to increase pricing on tequila, we could, but it obviously becomes applicable in today's environment too. So yeah, no, it's a great idea to lock in contracts if you can, as long as you can get out if you want to. That was the whole thing with whiskey, is a lot of people were getting into contracts at for whiskey thinking they're going to need it and the prices were going to, continue to skyrocket. But then lo and behold, prices have gone down and the market is not what it was. And maybe sales aren't what they were. So now you're like, well, I don't even need this whiskey anymore. So you want to make sure you're not obligated to buy a bunch of juice that you don't actually even need.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Unless you just want it for home use, home consumption use.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So did we cover the non-alc?
Yeah, I mean, I think non-alc is a little is almost the same with some nuances, obviously, in terms of labeling. And there's a lot of great resources and new brands starting, so we can certainly help on that. But yeah, it's quite similar other than the labeling requirements in terms of the path. All of them are kind of the same in terms of like getting the formulation done, the trademarks done, the contract with your various, suppliers and providers, etc.
Do you have an example of a lawsuit that you want to talk about that had a real lawyer look at the contract, maybe that wouldn't have happened? Like an example in your mind?
I mean, a lot of them settle, right? I mean, the ones that we're involved with are typically get to the point where lawsuits are not actually filed. Occasionally there'll be a lawsuit filed, but I'm not a litigator. I mean, obviously I have litigation and courtroom experience, but we're not a litigation firm. But we almost always, even when we bring in litigation counsel, settle them. Like they typically don't go to trial just because the economics of trial are so high. And at the end of the day, even if it's like $100,000 or $200,000, like those things typically will settle. Just because of the cost of litigation is so high.
Yeah. No, I get that for sure. And it could go on forever.
It's those labeling, like the Poppy lawsuit, or there was the one with, I can't remember the ice cream brand with vanilla, where there's no real vanilla. Like those are the ones where you need to be careful. Don't call your product vanilla ice cream if there's no vanilla, right? Things like that. Make sure it is what it is and don't mislabel products. So it's like those mislabeling or trying to cause confusion in the consumer's mind by saying that it is something when it's not. I would be very careful about those things.
Yeah, I think you used an example of ginger on a can where they're saying, well, because we have ginger, it's a health benefit, right?
Totally. I mean, you definitely want to be very careful of any health claims for sure. Like with CBD as an example, there were all those brands that were like, well, it'll, cure cancer, that, it'll help you do this, it'll help you do that. Like you want to be very sure that you're not making especially drug claims. One thing I was going to mention though is ADA compliance. There and have been over the years lawsuits they oftentimes target celebrity brands, but it could be anybody where there'll be a plaintiff suit and they'll sue the brand because it doesn't have the ADA compliance software on it. And it's pretty inexpensive to get that software like on your website. And it saves you, all of these typically settle, regardless of whether the suits are, frivolous or have merit or not. They typically settle and somewhere in like 10 to 20 or so $1,000. But I would suggest that people look into and talk with their tech providers or, whoever that they think is the best resource to do that.
And what is it?
Have you ever seen like in the bottom corner of a website, there's like the blue circle with like the white figure so that it will read the website to you? It's like an American Disabilities Act
Gotcha. Okay.
icon. So it does that.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So you'll see it on some websites. It's especially material for websites that allow people that would otherwise be stores where you like can come in and buy stuff. So you'll probably start seeing it.
Okay. That's a good tip. Yeah, 20, 30 grand. That's no joke.
Yeah, and it's just a few $100 a year for some of them. For most of them, it's not very expensive. For the software, it's pretty easy.
Okay. Do you want to move over to THC and CBD?
Sure. So quite similar. They're both relying upon the Farm Bill. CBD was obviously a big craze previously. I would say hemp-derived THC is the latest craze, and there's a difference between hemp-derived THC and marijuana-derived THC, like a very big difference in terms of the laws and what's happening in the environment now. So marijuana-derived THC has to be sold at dispensaries, whether that's like adult use or adult use meaning recreational or medical, right? But at a dispensary. Whereas hemp-derived THC is what you see now that's sold at like sometimes I think Total Wine or like and there's a Plum Market near me that sells them. And those are the ones that are like super hot right now. But you see like almost every day different states taking actions to try to, potentially close that loophole because it is arguably a loophole. It's basically the hemp that's permissible under the Farm Bill, and they synthesize it in a way to pull out THC. So if people are going to jump on that bandwagon, perhaps the time is now. My suggestion that people do it or not do it, but the loophole could be closed in any state at any time. Largely, obviously, you just have to keep an eye on the legislation and regulations. Just be mindful of like what's going on in your state before you jump into it, or the states you're planning to sell to.
Yeah. Yeah, boy, that's a gamble, isn't it? I know some people who were doing great with it, and one reason or another, because Whole Foods and Sprouts, they are very particular about the ingredients that you can put in on top of just trying to maintain the THC and CBD regulations. It's almost impossible to do without a lawyer, especially the way it changes all the time. I mean, obviously, there's more and more people coming into the space, so it's not like there's a lack of products or anything, or people are dropping out, but it may be, survival of the fittest in the sense where may the strong survive, because it is hard for a small business in general, let alone to try to keep up with all these laws, these changes.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that there's just it's a little bit of the Wild West in terms of the state laws and and obviously the lack of federal laws other than under the Farm Bill. So certainly people just need to kind of be on top of it and know what they're doing. But there's just so many products jumping into the space that you're right. It was sort of like the CBD craze was several years ago. It's just hard to know who's going to shake out as being kind of the leaders.
Yeah. And it'll be interesting too, because, if states are selling it and they're in the state and they reverse their policy on it, are they going to just throw all the product away? They're going to pay for it
No,
and dump it?
I I think that it would be something like where there's a sunset, right? Like the law becomes
Yeah.
effective as of whatever,
They're grandfathered in.
and as of January 1st, 2026, there's no more sales or whatever, something like that.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't have that. I think there'll be kind of like a a period of time where you can wind down or transition or know what you're going to do. I don't think it's going to be like tomorrow you can't sell anymore and you're tired.
So you feel like there are more states that are trying to stop it than just allow it?
Well, they're just looking at what the regulations are to either regulate it more or perhaps prohibit it, but or restrict where it's sold, things like that. So it's become so popular that where maybe there wasn't anything on the books and it was sort of this gray area and people were taking advantage of that. Now states are looking at it and should we have something or should we not? But it's just a question of like now regulators are looking at the category because of the growth and deciding in some cases should we have something, should we not?
Yeah. Interesting.
And, legislative sessions are, bills have been passed and nothing happened with them. So, maybe we'll see what happens.
From your perspective of these, non-alcs and CBD THCs, I feel like the Wholesalers Association got on board with this years ago. And so I feel like, from a spirits perspective of the traditional, distribution channels, they were excited about it, got in front of it. I don't know about the beer side. And I don't know if they're as excited about it as the spirits side, and or which distribution channels they're going through. Do you have any insight into that?
A little bit. I mean, we've done contracts with distributors on the CBD and hemp-derived THC side. I guess there's two pieces to it. One is in the state that you're going to distribute in, can the distributors sell things that are not beer, wine, or spirits, depending on their license? Are they allowed to, right? And so that's one piece. Is it the same distributor and can they? Assuming they can, the other question for the brand is where do you want your product? So am I competing with beer? Am I competing with like, you know, other adult soft drink type things, other adult non-alcoholic beverages? Presumably you are, or maybe you want to be competing with, you know, wine or whatever. I don't know what it is, but that's kind of how you want to determine it, is where you want your product to go, because different distributors have different expertise. The high-end spirits guys are not necessarily going to C stores. If you want to be in C stores, then you find a distributor going to those stores, and maybe it's an alcohol or maybe it's not.
Fair point.
I often I say sometimes people ask how you know which distributor to go to, and I always, and again, I don't know if this is the right way to do it or not, but I think you start backwards, meaning go to the 5 or 10 accounts that you want to be in and ask who their favorite distributors are and who they order from regularly and why, and then think about talking to those folks.
It's a great idea. I never thought about that. Leave it to the smart lawyer. That's awesome. Yeah, that's a fantastic idea, actually. I wonder how many accounts would say the same name.
Well, that's yeah, right. I mean, that's the question. If they do, then I think you've got a great distributor in mind. If not, then yeah, it's going to be a little bit more.
Yeah. Yeah, it really does depend on your distribution strategy. You know, if you are C-store, then yeah, of course, beer is the way to go. I mean, we're kind of in that space with sake, right? Because it's really a traditional brew, and a lot of sakes are distributed through breweries or through the beer distribution channels. And I think it's both. I think you just have to find the one that works for whatever your concept is, you know?
Yeah,
And
no,
what you're kind of looking for. Yeah. All right. Well, I feel like we've covered quite a bit. Is there any other advice or anything else that we might have glossed over that you want to
I
talk about?
think we hit it. Yeah. Now we know how to
Yeah.
start Thirsty Thursdays, beer, wine, spirits, non-alc, THC, and CBD.
There you go. There you go. Just get a good lawyer. That's really the important part. I mean, and when, like, for me, I'll be honest, like, we have a friend that's a lawyer and she does all of my stuff and I drive her crazy. But without even coming up with the name of a company, I don't even I just say, "Hey, is this available?" You know what I mean? Like, I feel like a lawyer is the first thing you do.
Well, it's one of the first for sure. You could certainly go on the USPTO site and type in your name. You can do Google searches. You can go on TTB's website if it's an out product and see if anybody else is using the name on, another label. So that's a good way to kind of cut down your list. And then when you come up with like one or two that you like or whatever, then then maybe reach out to a trademark lawyer or a lawyer who does trademarks on a regular basis, and you run the clearance searches then, just to save some time.
Yeah. One of the things I remember you mentioning back to Thursdays whiskey was was you said mentioned something about getting a permit in the state. And is that a time consuming thing to do or to get?
Yeah, I mean, it can be. In some states, it's not so bad. Other states, it can be longer. And so basically, federally, you need a permit, obviously, to be able to buy and sell alcohol at the wholesale level. And then in your state, you're more likely than not going to need some sort of permit to be able to do the same. It's not always a wholesale permit. Some states have a different permit that you would get, but usually it's a couple months. There's some states that are much, much longer and some states that are shorter. And then the other thing just to be mindful of, if you are doing these things yourself and not using kind of one of these compliance companies we talked about in terms of the outside, you are going to need in a lot of states various permits to sell to distributors in that other state, out of state shipper type permits. Not all states have that requirement, but some do. And so, just be mindful of that when you're going into a new state. There may be a delay because you need a permit to sell to that distributor in some cases. Or in like the case of,
I didn't know that.
yeah, or like in New York, you have price postings. Someone's like, I want to start selling June 1st, and it's already, May, the middle of May. It's like, well, you're a little late for that, but you just be mindful of kind of backing into the date you want to start and the permits needed, if any.
So how long do you have to have your price within the system to start selling?
So things monthly in New York, and so you would price post basically for like the next month, right? So like in May, you would price post for July, basically.
Okay.
But there's a schedule on their SLA website. The SLA has a great website that.
Very cool. Yeah, see, every state is different. It makes it so crazy, and it's so funny because I have a export business now, and we're trying to learn each of these different countries. And when the more I talk to people, on the podcast, they're like, it's literally from going from one state to the next. It's literally like working in a different country because the laws are so different.
Yeah, it definitely can be, which is why it's fun for us. So all good.
Yeah. Keeps Ryan busy.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I thank you for coming on. How do people get in touch with you?
Sure. My website is malkin.law, MALKIN.LAW. And we have LinkedIn and Instagram, at Malkin Law. So yeah, feel free to follow us on both and shoot an email over and let me know if I can help.
Awesome. Awesome, awesome, awesome. Well, I like to play a little game at the end if you're game
Yeah.
for it, where it's kind of a rapid fire question. So if I were to ask you what kind of drink would you be? Whether it's alcohol, non-alcohol, doesn't matter.
That's the question.
Yeah, that's the question. Sorry. What kind of cocktail is Ryan Malkin?
Yeah, I would probably say maybe a Negroni.
Nice. Nice. Negronis are great. They're fun to make too.
Yeah, they're fun to make, and yeah, those are typically my go-to at restaurants.
Nice. That's a good one. What about what's your favorite movie?
Well, the one I can watch over and over and never get bored of it is The Big Lebowski.
Oh, that's a good one. That's a good one. Towards the end of COVID, there was a movie theater that played it, and I had a little sponsorship going on with Terramana, and we watched it in a big movie theater. It was so fun.
Yeah, and it never gets old, that one.
It doesn't. So is there any lines from that movie or any other movie that you like to say?
Nothing I typically say from a movie that comes to mind, unfortunately. I'm sure as soon as we get off, I'll come up with something.
Yeah, that's okay. What about favorite food?
I love Italian and Mexican, eat sushi a lot. I mean, those are probably the
Food. You like food.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
There's nothing that's your go-to?
I would say Italian when I'm in Detroit area, Middle Eastern often because they have great Middle Eastern, especially in the Detroit area
Yeah.
when I go home, So if I'm traveling, I try to do something local.
Yeah. No, 100%. I love that too. That's what the whole traveling experience is about. Well, Ryan, this has been really fun and very informational. Ryan and I have talked about putting this in paper or on a website so that it's like a downloadable cheat sheet, if you will, for these different segments that you might be interested in building a brand that might be helpful along your journey and creating a brand. And then of course you'll have Ryan at your fingertips because he can help you along the way, as well as Set the Bar. Set the Bar is a great resource if you're in a state you're not familiar with or getting to know. That's a good place to go to get all the laws and all the explanations behind it. So that's awesome. Any last words, Ryan?
I don't think so. Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for coming on. I really appreciate you taking the time out to do the podcast with me. All right. Take care, Ryan. Bye.
Produced by Fedora J Productions. Tune in next Thursday and have a great week.